we're going to be working on some self-myofascial release. What you can see in front of me is quite the complement of toys, and each one is necessary for different portions of the body. My hope is that I can provide you an introduction to this type of work so that you have a tool in your toolbox so you can take care of yourself. For our standard full body protocol, you can either use a foam roller or a foam ball. They each have their own merits, and I prefer to use both because each part of the body is just a little bit different, and we can't get into all the spaces that we need to with either just one or the other. My suggestion is that you pick up one of each. The goal of the standard protocol is to break up scar tissue and free the myofascial sheath. The way we do that is by implementing 4 different types of movement while on the implement. First one is compression, which we can see as being just on the foam roller, rolling back and forth. The second is shearing. That looks like the body is moving side to side over the muscle belly, almost like we're rocking back and forth on a tangent. Scrubbing is we start to shake our body over the foam roller or other implement, creating a scrubbing-like action. And then there's flossing. If we're working this muscle belly here, we're going to move the joint that's distal or further away from that muscle so that the muscle contracts and relaxes underneath the implement in order to floss that muscle, almost like you're flossing your teeth. This muscle here on the front of the shin is called the tibialis anterior. What it does is it dorsiflexes the foot. It brings the toes towards the knee. And so our goal here is to rest the implement in this space here to start breaking up any tightness, scar tissue that may have accumulated over time. We're going to use our standard foam roller here, and we're going to just place our shin directly on the top of the foam roller. Gently rock over to the side or laterally, and then we'll begin to kneel on the foam roller. Putting some pressure through the tibialis anterior, we're compressing first and finding those spaces that are a little cranky. And then I found one, and I like to go directly to flossing next. So I go from compression to flossing. And what I'm doing is I'm going to start moving the joint that's distal to the muscle belly. So I'm on that muscle belly here, and I'm just going to rock my foot back and forth. So plantar flexion, pointing the toes down, dorsiflexion, bringing the toes towards the knee, and we're just rocking that back and forth. And I can slowly slide the foam roller through different spaces as we start to open up the tibialis anterior here on the right. On the tibialis anterior, the muscle that's on the shin here, on the left side I'll be using the foam ball. And so like the foam roller, it's going to be resting right in this space here. So placing the ball down on the mat, I'm going to kneel on the foam ball, and I'm going to allow my body to drift over this space. What's interesting about the ball is that since it's so unstable, it's a little bit more pressure on the upper body to keep you stable, where you can rest really nicely on the foam roller. This requires a little bit more finesse. And I find those areas that feel a little sticky, and then I'll start to begin to move that distal joint, so my ankle for this muscle. And as I finagle the ball around it in different spaces, I find little areas of scar tissue, and I start breaking them up. So at the tibialis anterior, I find that compression and flossing works best. We can do shearing and scrubbing, but I don't think it's going to serve us in this position. Good. Nice job. For this portion, when you work on the triceps surae, or the gastrocnemius and soleus, the calf muscles. And so with our foam roller, we're going to be working on the right side here and placing it underneath where the belly of the muscle is. The Achilles tendon comes up from the heel, and we're going to be placing the foam roller right into that space here. And we can just do a little bit of a tripod pose where we can lift our body up. And we're just feeling the foam roller through the calf muscle here. What's great about this is once you find that little spot that's a little grumpy, you can immediately start flossing. And so for me, I start flossing, dorsiflex, plantar flex, dorsiflex, plantar flex, really getting in there. And so if this doesn't feel like it's enough pressure for you, like it's not enough, bring that left leg over the top and you can begin putting a little bit more pressure. If you're feeling really athletic today, you can bring your hip off the mat and you can keep that pumping with the ankle as your hip is off the mat also. And so as we start working through this space here, we'll notice that this space isn't really opening the way we want it to. So you can start to shear, and we're going to be rocking side to side over the muscle belly rather than top down. So this is inferior superior, this is a medial to lateral roll. And so we can feel that some of those spaces start to get a little cranky. What we can do now, if we don't feel like it's opening up even more, we can start shaking the leg, and that's our scrubbing action. So, things we can do for the calf muscle. We begin to run the whole calf muscle. The spaces that feel tight, we can pause and begin to floss. If the floss doesn't feel like it's breaking it up in the first couple of repetitions, we can increase the load, or we can begin to shear. If that still doesn't feel like it's getting the right type of work accomplished, we can begin to scrub. And that's this side-to-side action. On the left side, we're going to learn how to open up the triceps surae with the foam ball. Just like on the right, we're placing the ball down on the mat and placing the ball right in the middle of the muscle belly. We'll feel the Achilles tendon comes up, and then it drops right into the muscle belly here. As we begin to move the calf around on the ball, we'll find these different spaces that feel pretty cranky. Immediately when we feel that, we can begin our flossing protocol. 5, 10, 20 reps, whatever you feel is necessary to start breaking that up. If that doesn't feel like it's getting the work done, we can increase the load by placing one leg over, continue to floss. Still doesn't, we can lift and put even more pressure down. Whoop, falling a bit. Lift, you can continue to floss, even more pressure, continue to floss. Or we begin our shear patterning, that's side to side. Again, we can shear side to side until we feel like it begins to get that broken up. If it doesn't feel that way, we can stabilize the ball with the other foot. So I'm hooking the ball on the other side and I'm just shaking back and forth, breaking up that scar tissue that's in there. Nice job. In this next part of the series, we're going to be working on the quadriceps, or the front of the thigh here. We're going to be doing the foam roller on the right and the foam ball on the left. If we place the foam roller down just in front of our knee in a kneeling position, we can dive over the top and get some nice purchase on the foam roller, just like this. And so we begin to rock back and forth over the quadriceps, finding all the different spaces. Now, unlike the calf, the quad is a much bigger piece of tissue. And so as we're working it here, we're gonna have to start hitting different angles. And so as we start to hit different angles, we might get different sensations. If we find that, ooh, there's a spot that's kind of tender, the next thing we do, we go from compression to flossing. Our distal joint to the quad is the knee. So we'll just beginning to do little heel to tush action, breaking up some of that scar tissue in there. And do as many as you need. It might be 5, might be 20, might be 50. Just working it. If it feels like it's not breaking up, we can start doing some shearing. So I'm just imagining that my leg is a tail. I'm just wagging it back and forth here, breaking up, going from medial to lateral, working on that scar tissue in there. Again, if that doesn't feel like it's getting it broken up, we can begin to get our scrub on, and I'm just wiggling my leg back and forth, scrubbing the tissue, breaking up some of that scar in there. Noodling back through, compressing, making sure everything's nice and smooth. Great job. Working on the quadriceps on the left side, we're going to be using the foam ball. Again, we're going to be in a position where the ball is directly in front of the knee here, and I'm going to kneel over the top, allowing it to get some purchase, and immediately I can feel the ball against the quadricep here. I'm going to bring it back and forth over the quad. Now the quad, again, is a much bigger muscle than the calf, so we're going to have to find all of the different spaces of the front of the leg here, going back and forth. Up, we found a spot that's tender. We're going to bring that knee back and forth, heel to tush, as the ball is gripping into the tissue there. With the foam ball, it's more difficult to do the scrubbing and the shear patterns, but what we're going to do instead is we're going to allow the flossing to hit different angles, and that's where we're really going to get our money's worth here. So again, flossing and compressing with the ball is going to be where we get the bang for our buck on the quadricep. We're going to work on our hamstring, or the biceps femoris, the posterior part of the top of the leg. So a big, tight muscle for many of us. We're going to learn how to break up some of those adhesions and scar tissue that's in the posterior over the coming videos. With our foam roller on the right side, we're going to be placing the foam roller down underneath the knee here. And so as the foam roller is there, we can begin to slide towards the end of the mat. If you have tightness in that hamstring, it's going to be apparent quite quickly. And as we start to feel that tightness, we begin to find those different spaces. Oh, I have it. Now, the distal joint to the belly of the hamstring is the knee. But we can't really move the knee that much. I mean, we have a little bit of movement, but it really doesn't get the high notes. So with the hamstring, we're going to work a lot more with our scrubbing pattern and our shear. And so let's begin by working the shear patterning. So we find those little spaces that feel pretty tight. We're just going to rock back and forth gently. It's not really breaking up. So what we're going to work now is a little bit of a scrub. Now if the scrub feels like it's getting in there, but there's just not enough pressure, we can cross the leg over the top and get that scrub action there. Now for some of us, being on our hands for this period of time might be pretty challenging. So what you can do instead is come forward and rock over the opposite leg. I'll show it from a different angle. So I'm on the hamstring on the right side here, and I'm moving towards my left knee, so I have a nice stable base, and I don't have to worry about this balancing act here. So I'm up front, and I'm just gently rocking here. we can do our shearing patterning and our scrubbing from this position as well. It might feel a little bit more stable here. So I'm just working that angle. Again, very difficult to do the flossing when you have a floor in the way. Nice job. Let's work on opening up the hamstring with our foam ball here. So in a seated position, we're going to drop that hamstring right into the top of the ball here. I'm going to change my angle just so you guys can see a little bit better. And so it's right in the back of my thigh. And as I start to float my pelvis, I'll begin rolling all the way up to the top of my hip, all the way down to the back of the knee, all through the different spaces. And now the benefit of the ball is that we have a little bit more of an ability to feel different spaces in the hamstring here, in that biceps femoris. The difference with the foam roller is that we can't get that like 3D XYZ plane action. We're very limited on the foam roller with this muscle in particular. What we can notice here is that I can get a little bit of purchase, a little bit of tack on the hamstring here, and as I move that foam roller, you can see where I'm going with this. My distal joint is my knee, and I can move my knee here. We can't really get this work done with the foam roller because we're limited to pressing directly into the top and stopping with the floor. We can get some purchase underneath laterally to the hamstring here, and we can still work that scar tissue like this. And so I'm working some angles that maybe are a little bit more challenging to do with a foam roller. As you can see, I'm still getting the hamstring, but I'm getting it from a different angle than we can get on that foam roller there. That shearing patterning, that side to side, much easier with the foam ball than with the foam roller. And like we did earlier, if it's challenging with our hands back like this, we can always bring our hands forward and stabilize on our own knee on the opposite side, working the foam ball on that opposite leg. So I'm leaning on my right, and my left leg is the one that's active in that myofascial release. I can bend my leg back, so I'm in a Z-sit position. Again, the ball is underneath my hamstring on this side, and I'm gently rocking it back and forth, breaking up some of those adhesions. So we're combining a couple of different things all at the same time with that foam ball. We're doing a bit of shear, a bit of compression, a bit of flossing, all simultaneously. Enjoy. We're going to be working the iliotibial band, the IT band, a fan favorite of many of you. This band runs down the side of the leg and inserts into the fibula here. Part of it into the tibia, but part of it into the fibula as well. It comes up the side of the leg, right where the seam of your pants would be, and then up into the hip. We have this little bump here, it's called the greater trochanter. That portion there is where the iliotibial band, the IT band, crosses over before it becomes this beautiful muscle called the tensor fasciae lata, the tensor of the lateral fascia. This muscle here is what pulls the IT band. The IT band is not a muscle, it just is a big, huge tendon. This tendon brings the whole leg together into this single confluence point. This is where we see a lot of scar tissue from years of exposure to sport or poor walking mechanics. Oftentimes, we use this foam roller here to break up that IT band. Now, many of you have tortured yourself by foam rolling on the IT band directly. What you're doing is you're pressing the tissue directly into the bone, which is not very comfortable. My goal for you would be, let's play with that foam ball. Instead of going directly onto the IT band, let's go up into the hip and start breaking up some of the adhesions in the hip, and then we can start playing with the IT band once it's loosened from the muscular part, and start to break up the adhesions within the muscle belly itself before we start chasing that tendon here. With my ball here, I'm going to sit, bring the ball right next to that little bone here called the greater trochanter, and I'm going to lift and bring the ball just north of it. I rest on my elbow, my left leg is out straight, and I can feel the ball sitting into the soft tissue here. Now, our iliac crest, our hip bone, is right here. The front of our pelvis is right here, and we're not on the bone, we're in the soft space in between. I'm not on my butt, I'm on the side of my hip, above the bony prominence of the leg here, just in this little space here. It is tender. If you've never worked on this space, it's going to be very tender. So having a good amount of weight on the elbow here, you might even want to come forward a bit. This is going to be a challenging position for you. Once you get used to it, we can begin moving the leg. I'm just twisting it back and forth. I'm lifting it up towards the ceiling. I'm just going to move this foam roller out of the shot here. And as we begin to lift the leg, what we're doing here is we're flossing. And we're flossing that tensor fasciae, that TFL. And we're just doing that old buns of steel move, right? We're doing those adductors, and we're moving that TFL and flossing it, getting rid of some of that scar tissue in there. As we find these other spaces that feel like they need a little bit of attention, I'll begin to oscillate ever so gently, just compressing. Because we have the ball, we're not limited just to north-south or superior-inferior movement. We can do 360 movement, X, Y, and Z plane, lateral and medial as well. And so we're finding those different spaces of the TFL, of the beginnings of the IT band. We're coming down to the greater trochanter, but we're not on top of it because it's going to be very challenging on that bony prominence there. Good. Nice job. Working on that TFL, working on that IT band, it runs down the lateral portion of the leg here. For some of us, resting our entire body weight on that might be really challenging. So instead, I would suggest we take that foam ball and we just grip it into our own leg. And we just subtly press. And we can use our own pressure patterns to start to break up those adhesions of the IT band. Now, we're not pressing so hard that we're creating bruising. We're pressing hard enough that we can get some tack on our skin. And I'm just finagling and wiggling and noodling into these different positions of the lateral portion of my thigh. Now, my greater trochanter, that bony prominence that we were feeling earlier, is up in here. So we can get all the way up into the top here, all the way down in between here as well. So I'm reaching underneath my thigh here, and I'm just cupping my hands with a crisscross grip. You can do one hand over the other, player's choice really. And we're just opening up this tissue here, saying hello to these different spaces. You can also begin to twist. This would be almost like a scrubbing exercise because we're getting that tack of the tissue and the ball together, and then we start to move. So this is where we see that scrubbing really start to hit some high notes. Now, I've been working on the posterior part of the IT band. Let's go to the anterior part because since it runs down the side, it's attached to both the quadriceps and the hamstring. So on the front side, I can almost create a stirring-like action or a back and forth, like we're compressing or shearing, just scrubbing those different areas. Once we come up into the area up by the hip, we'll start to feel the same sensations that we had with the TFL release, but we're a little bit lower than that. But we can feel the connections. Now I'm on the anterior part of the IT band, but I'm never directly on it. When I'm directly on it, I think it would serve you for longevity's purposes to stay off of it because I feel like we create more damage in there sometimes. Enjoy. Let's work on opening the piriformis. Place the foam roller next to your hip on the right side. Place your hand over the foam roller and then load your hip onto the foam roller. You should be right on that greater trochanter, that bony prominence on the side there. You'll cross your right ankle over your left knee and then sit so that your glute tissue is directly on the foam roller here. As we start to rock back and forth, you'll start to sense and feel those tight and tender fibers in there. That's the piriformis. Now, if the leg is straight like this, we won't feel it because the glute tissue gets plump and supple over the piriformis muscle. If we cross over, then the glute stretches and moves out of the way, and then the piriformis gets really apparent, so that's where it's activated. Now, as we rock superior to inferior, up and down, we'll start to get those compressive forces in there and opening up the piriformis. We're going to open up the glute at the same time. It's kind of a 2-for-1, but the real goal here is hitting that piriformis muscle. Once we're done with that compression part of the series, we can go right over to that shearing part. And so as we go right to left or medial to lateral, we'll start to find those other spaces that might have caught that we didn't feel initially, and we can start to compress again or shear a little bit more. We can also do our scrubbing by opening up and rocking back and forth more rapidly, like we're shaking salt and pepper. We can also floss the piriformis, which is a little more challenging. We'll take that left hand and we'll make a nice base in the back here. So we'll be making a triangular base between the foam roller where our piriformis is getting compressed there and our arms. And we just rock back and forth, getting a nice little ab workout at the same time as we're opening up that piriformis. Nice job. Let's work on opening up the piriformis on the left side here using our foam ball. Like on the right side, we're going to place the ball adjacent to our left hip, and then we'll load our weight onto the ball so that our glute is sitting right on top of it. We'll cross our left ankle over our right knee, laying all of our weight into that ball. Now it's a lot different than the foam roller because it's not as broad as a surface. And so since it's not as broad of a surface, it's going to really get into those nooks and crannies, and you're going to feel it real quick. And so you're going to feel that it might be a bit more tender than the foam roller. So if you're feeling like it's too much, take your breath away, maybe back off and go back over to the foam roller. For this, we can really work in that 3D motion, that X, Y, and Z plane, and work into the different areas of the glute and piriformis. And so if we rock back, we can really get into those little tiny grooves of the space between the hip bones and the sacrum there. So a little bit different than working on the foam roller. We don't have to move around as much, but we can move more. So we're not doing the same compression, scrubbing, shearing patterns. We're really just rocking and fitting into those different spaces. You can see my movement's very subtle. I might change over to maybe back myself up. I can even cross over all the way to get into those different spaces. I don't have to move around and wiggle as much with the foam ball to get the same results as with the foam roller. Again, this is a lot more invasive than the foam roller because it's a much smaller surface area. The big broad surface area of the foam roller is a lot more forgiving. So as we work through the tissue here, we're going to feel those little adhesions that are really creating a lot of restriction and mobility. As we feel those restrictions, those adhesions, that tenderness, we're going to sit into those spaces and we can gently nudge and finagle into those spaces. Okay? Nice job. Let's work on opening up the Iliopsoas, your hip flexor. You'll notice that there's a bunch of different toys around me. And these implements are going to be really useful in opening up the iliopsoas. The foam roller here isn't going to be our best fit for this particular muscle because it's too large of a surface for the area that we're going to be addressing. Let's look at how we're going to use some of these other implements to best serve us in opening up the hip flexor. Let's set the correct position for the foam ball on the hip flexor. We're going to find the pubic bone, the navel, and the front part of the iliac crest here. We're going to place the ball in that small triangle on the right side. We're going to drop our left hand down, our left hip down, left elbow, and fall that right hip forward right onto that foam ball. Now my head is up for explanation purposes, but we're going to be dropping our head down, and you can have your head on one side or the other, it does not matter, but you're just going to rest in this position. And now you're on this foam ball for 5 to 10 minutes, just letting it settle in. Your breath should be normal and neutral and should not be held or labored. So we're just hanging out on the foam ball, allowing the ball to do the work, letting our breath open up that hip flexor. It's going to be challenging. If you've never done this before, it might be best for you to try one of the modifications that we have coming up. Now that we have a sense of where the hip flexor is, if it was too much for us and we couldn't really breathe well, we have a dodgeball here. And so we're going to find the space where the hip flexor is in the same way. We're going to come up, we're going to palpate where our pubic bone is, our navel, ASIS, put the ball right into that space. Left hand down, left hip down, onto our side, roll onto the ball, and we're going to feel immediately it's a little bit different, it's a little bit softer than what we were experiencing with the foam ball. It might be easier to breathe here, it might be just as difficult. If it's still as difficult, we have another modifier that we're going to do instead. But here, we can hang out and we can feel our breath. And if our breath is normal and neutral, then this is the space that we need to be in. Another modification after our dodgeball is the yoga ball or Pilates ball. Depends on who you ask. But it's a inflatable exercise ball that's about 8 inches. And so what we're doing here is we're allowing the ball to have a lot more compression. Even though our dodgeball is compressible, it still has a bit more firmness than our yoga ball. So we're going to start with our yoga ball and we're going to place into that same position that we had the dodgeball in. We're going to find the pubic bone here, navel, ASIS, and then we're going to place the ball into that space. So we're over to the side. Place our left hand down, left hip down, left elbow down, roll over, and then we're on the ball here. And so this is a lot more forgiving than our dodgeball, even more forgiving than our foam ball. And so what we're doing here is we're just finding our breath, finding that space, and feeling what it feels like in that space. If you can't breathe here, we have another modification, but that's for a different video. It's more of a stretch than anything else. So we're going to hang out in this space, we're going to breathe, we're going to allow the body to settle in on the foam ball, the dodgeball, or the Pilates ball for a number of minutes. This beautiful implement that I have in front of me is called the Psorite. It is named such because it opens up the Iliopsoas. So it's a nice play on words. It's gained some notoriety in the past few months because of the Joe Rogan Experience, his podcast. And it's a great tool. However, it's not for the faint of heart. If you're having trouble with one of the foam balls, this is hard plastic. And so if you're having trouble on the ball, I wouldn't suggest that you use this first because it's pretty unforgiving. But I want to demonstrate how to use it appropriately so that you're able to use it if you come across it at the gym or academy or wherever you train. This implement that I have in front of me here is called the Psorite. It's gained some popularity in the past couple of months with the Joe Rogan Experience promoting it quite often. It's a great implement, however, it's not for the faint of heart. And if you're having some trouble with the foam ball, or if you have to modify using the foam ball, I wouldn't suggest using this just yet. It's pretty unforgiving and it's hard plastic, so it doesn't really give the way that a ball or a dodgeball or our Pilates ball gives and kind of breaks away, opening up the surface area. It's a very small surface area and it really dives right on that iliopsoas, that hip flexor. So I would like you to use it judiciously, and if it feels like it's too much, it's probably too much. But I'd like to demonstrate how to use it appropriately so that you can use it well wherever you find it, if it's something that is available to you wherever you train. Just like the foam ball, dodgeball, or Pilates ball, we're going to take the Psorite here, we're going to place into the same space. But our real marker here is going to be the iliac crest right here. And so as we feel the iliac crest, we're going to take the Psorite and place it right into those spaces. So now we have a sense of where this is. What we can do is we can drop the Psorite down, knowing that our hip is going to be placed directly over it. We can lie flat down onto the Psorite here. And I like to have my elbows up. Some people lay flat like this, but I like to have a little bit more control of where the pressure is going. And so I start on the inside of the hip and I let it migrate up superior towards my head. So it drops into the spaces just above the ASIS, that little bony prominence that we were feeling earlier for that triangle. So if we imagine that triangle there, it's on the top part of the triangle, more towards the belly button. If we go too high here, it feels wrong. It just doesn't feel like it's hitting the right notes. It's just in soft tissue here, and it feels like it's going to take your breath away. It's almost moving your bowels around in a funny way. What we can do is just make sure that we're up a little bit and we drop down so that we're just above our hip bone, still in the soft tissue, not on the bones, but not fully into the soft tissue of the abdominal cavity, crushing the viscera. So as we're here, you can see I can breathe pretty well because I'm explaining very well, but at the same time, it still feels like a lot. Doing my leg lifts with this, it's not as comfortable as with the foam ball. So this is almost like the level up from the foam ball. At the same time, it feels like it might be too hard. So I like to stay with my foam ball. I like to be a little bit more constructive with my mobility, not destructive. I'm not saying that the Psorite is destructive, but for me personally, this feels like a lot for my body. Everybody's different. This might be the right implement for you. We're going to work on opening up the QL, or Quadratus Lumborum. For that, we're going to use the Lacrosse ball. The QL runs between the ribs and the iliac crest in the posterior. What it does is this motion here. It creates some curvature in the spine as it contracts left and right. So what we're going to do is, if you feel like you have a back spasm, sometimes the QL is firing and that lacrosse ball can fit right into that space and decrease that spasm by allowing that muscle to cool off. The easiest way to find the QL is by using our lacrosse ball. And so our rib cage is here, and we can feel the ends of our ribs here. We can feel the soft tissue in between, and then we can feel our hip bone. If we take our lacrosse ball and tuck it in the space between, we can feel that there's some soft tissue in between in the posterior. If we roll our body over the ball, we've gone too far, and we can feel that we've gone onto the spine. If we rock back just a bit, we can feel that we're directly on the soft tissue. the QL, the Quadratus lumborum, the Iliopsoas, the hip flexor, all attached back there. Also, there's some other muscles, longissimus, multifidi, a whole confluence point of soft connective tissue runs in that thoracolumbar fascia area. And so as we're on the ball here, we can feel and notice that there's definitely something back there that can be really tight. And so we're just sitting here, we're allowing it to do its work. Now, we're just doing compression now. What we can start to do is some shearing. And the way we do shearing with the QL release is by rocking our knees back and forth. And I'm just gently rocking side to side, and I'm allowing the ball to increase the compression on this right side here, and then back up to neutral. Back over to the right, and then back up to neutral. Now, I can elongate my leg down, and that gives it a little bit of a flossing action. I can move my hips from side to side, almost like I'm closing the gap and cinching the hip up towards my shoulder. I can start working some motion like that. Whatever you feel like would serve you to open up your QL. And as we switch over to the other side, we're going to place the ball underneath the left ribs, right on top of that QL, and it could feel completely different than the right. And so as we move back and forth, we might notice that, wow, this side's a lot tighter. You may have noticed with the hip flexor release that maybe your right hip flexor is really tight, maybe your left hip flexor is really tight, but your QL on the right was really loose, and your QL on the left is really tight. Everybody's different, so you're gonna have to find what your patterns feel like. And as we start to move through them, we're just rocking and feeling. We always start with compression first. We move to shearing. You might feel compelled to start moving right away. That's great. Know your body, feel your body, get a sense. You might want to elongate a leg out, you might want to elongate both out, you might want to rock back and forth. All these things are good. We're just learning how this space here is connecting the hip and the rib together, and how we can begin to open up that space. Play around. Have some fun.